I left at 4:03 a.m. on a Sunday. No warning, no tears, just one duffel bag, and 22 years of knowing I didn't matter. My brother got a car with a red bow for graduating. I got a bill for rent, $800 a month to stay in the house I'd scrubbed, tiptoed through, and paid for with my silence. That night, as my family raised their glasses to Tyler, my father looked me in the eye and said, "It's time you started contributing." As if I hadn't been carrying them for years. They expected me to smile, to nod, to say thank you. Instead, I left a letter on the counter, not a goodbye, a receipt, for every insult. They wrapped it in politeness. Every moment I was overlooked, erased, rewritten. They thought they knew Madeline Carter, the quiet daughter, the easy one, the background girl who wouldn't leave. They were wrong, and by the time the sun rose, I was gone. Before we go deeper, tell me where you're watching from. And if you've ever been the one they underestimated, tap like, drop a comment, and subscribe for the rest. Because sometimes, the ones who disappear are the ones they should never have ignored. In the Carter household, truth was never spoken directly. It was folded neatly beneath Sunday smiles, buried under holiday traditions, and sealed behind front doors that locked both sound and sorrow inside. From the outside, we looked like a perfect Midwestern family, a charming home, polished shoes, polite children. But behind that image was something colder, something lonelier. My name is Madeline Carter, and I grew up in a home where the unspoken mattered more than what was said. My father, Charles, didn't yell. He led with stillness, measured stares, quiet sighs, and comments that sounded polite but cut deep if you knew how to listen. "Let's not overreact," was his favorite phrase. And over time, I learned it didn't mean calm down. It meant be quiet, be smaller. It is easy to manage. My mother, Laura, mastered the art of silence. She smoothed tension with careful smiles and looked away from anything that made her uncomfortable. She wasn't cruel. She was absent in the most present way. Her loyalty was to peace, even when that peace cost me everything. And then there was Tyler. My older brother could do no wrong. He was the golden boy with the bright smile, the easy charm, the endless excuses. When he crashed my dad's car at 16, I was upstairs doing homework. But it was me our father turned to and said, "You knew he was planning this, didn't you?" I hadn't. That didn't matter. That was the first rule I learned in our house. If Tyler did something wrong, someone else was responsible. The second rule was followed not long after. How things looked mattered more than how things felt. While I worked 2 part-time jobs and took online courses just to save money, Tyler lived in a dorm, tuition paid in full. When neighbors asked about us, my mother would smile and say, "Tyler's studying business at State, Madeline's still figuring things out," as if I were wandering, as if 60-hour weeks and late-night coursework were signs of failure, not grit. And then came the third rule, the one that shaped me the most. Love in our house was conditional. It was earned through obedience, through silence, through knowing your place and staying in it. By 22, I had become an expert at being invisible. I kept my head down, my grades up, and my hopes small enough to fit inside the back corner of a shared closet. I had started a small online jewelry business. Nothing grand, just something I built quietly, carefully, with no one watching. One night, I mentioned it at dinner. My father glanced up from his newspaper and said, "Still playing with beads." He didn't wait for an answer. Before I could speak, Tyler announced he'd made the dean's list, and just like that, the spotlight shifted. The applause began, and I disappeared. But something in me didn't. Not completely. Somewhere behind the silence, a fracture had already formed. I didn't know it yet, but the performance was about to end. It was a Sunday evening in early spring, the kind of evening where the light lingers a little longer, soft and golden through the kitchen windows. I was setting the table when my mother pulled open the high cabinet and handed me the good china. That was the moment I knew something was off. In the Carter family, we only used the good china twice a year, at Christmas. And when someone was about to hear news they wouldn't like, and since it wasn't December, I braced myself. Said it carefully. Sweetheart, my mother said with that rehearsed calm in her voice. Tonight's important. I said nothing, just nodded and placed each plate down on the table like I was preparing a stage, because that's what it always was, a performance, a play with carefully assigned roles. Tyler would be the star, Charles would deliver the monologue, and I, as always, would be scenery. Tyler arrived 10 minutes late, all charm and casual swagger, hugging our mother, clapping our father on the shoulder like he wasn't still technically a dependent. He sat at the right hand of our father. Of course. I took my usual place across the table. Dinner began as it always did. Tyler launched into stories from his final semester, professors he had impressed, job interviews lined up, and funny moments from frat events. Our parents laughed on cue, asked follow-up questions. Their eyes glowed when they looked at him. I cut my pot roast into smaller and smaller pieces, wondering if I stopped showing up to these dinners entirely, would anyone even notice? Then it happened. Charles set down his wine glass with slow, deliberate pride. Tyler, he said, voice warm and formal, your mother and I have been talking about your graduation gift. Tyler smiled modestly, though his eyes gleamed. You didn't have to get me anything. The diploma's enough. But we all knew he expected something. And we all knew he would get it. Laura clasped her hands like she was watching a marriage proposal. Oh, Charles. Should we tell him now? Why not, my father said, beaming. Son, we bought you a car. Not the old Camry. A brand new one. Pearl white. Leather interior. The works. The fork slipped from my hand and clattered against my plate. A new car. For Tyler. The same Tyler who had wrecked Dad's BMW at 16. The same Tyler who had racked up 3 speeding tickets last year. The same Tyler who had never held a job for more than a semester break. Across the table. He blinked. Genuine emotion trembled in his voice. Thank you. Seriously. Thank you. I don't even know what to say. My father raised his glass again. You earned it. 4 years of hard work. Graduating with honors. We're proud of you, son. I cleared my throat. That's really wonderful. Tyler, congratulations. And I meant it. Despite everything, I was proud of him. But something pushed me to ask, gently, almost joking. So, what happens to the old Camry? My parents exchanged a look, a subtle, practiced exchange that passed in a heartbeat. Charles leaned back in his chair. The warmth faded. In its place, business. We've been meaning to talk to you. Madeline, now that Tyler's graduating and you're not living at home much longer. What do you mean, I asked. But the answer was already curling in my gut. You're 22, he said, clasping his hands like he was chairing a meeting. It's time you started contributing. We've decided you need to pay rent. $800 a month, due to the first Sunday of every month. The room went still. The only sound was the ticking of the antique mantel clock. $800. That was more than half of what I made working both jobs. And I still had tuition, car insurance, and groceries. I don't understand, I said softly. Tyler never paid rent. He was in college, my father replied, as if that explained it. I'm in college too. I'm getting my degree online. He shrugged. That's different. Online classes aren't a real college experience. Besides, you're working. You can afford to contribute. The logic twisted in on itself. I was being punished for being independent, for trying. When would this start, I asked, knowing the answer before it came. Next Sunday, Charles said. First payment due. He raised his glass again. A toast to new beginnings, Tyler's bright future, and Madeline's new responsibility. They clinked glasses. No one looked at me. Even Tyler stayed quiet. I wanted to scream, to stand up, to walk out, but I didn't. I smiled, excused myself, carried the plates into the kitchen, and as I stood at the sink, washing the good china by hand, I felt something shift inside me. Something cold, something final. I will not be here next Sunday, and I would not ask permission to leave. I didn't slam the door. I didn't cry in the bathroom or throw my napkin down at the table. I didn't say a single word after they told me I owed them $800 a month for the privilege of existing under their roof. I just washed the dishes, one plate at a time, slowly, carefully, like I was trying to memorize the weight of silence. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, letting numbers circle my mind like vultures. Rent, groceries, gas, tuition. I did the math over and over. It never worked out. Even if I picked up more shifts, even if I stopped spending on everything but survival, there was no version of the math where I got to keep my future. Unless I left. I wasn't the dramatic one in the family. I wasn't the rebel. I didn't threaten to run away or scream into pillows. I was the daughter who kept the peace, the one who folded her dreams into manageable pieces. But something inside me had already broken. So I gave myself 6 days. 6 days to be the daughter they expected, while preparing to become someone they'd never see coming. On Monday morning, I smiled through breakfast. My mother hummed as she made coffee, commenting about the weather, asking if I could join her to shop for Tyler's graduation suit. I said I had work. She nodded, unbothered. After she left the room, I searched bus schedules. I mapped routes from Silverfield to anywhere that wasn't here. I chose Portland, not because it was glamorous, but because it was far, and because someone I trusted lived there. Dr. Meredith Holloway. My godmother, my grandmother Eleanor's best friend. A woman my father once called difficult in that tight-lipped tone he reserved for people he couldn't control. Tuesday. I worked both jobs. Bookstore in the morning, diner at night. I smiled at customers. I restocked shelves. I asked about dessert specials like nothing had changed, but every free moment, I was planning. I took out cash in small amounts. Quietly moved my most valuable belongings to the bottom drawer of my dresser, my laptop, my charger, and a worn leather jewelry box that had belonged to my grandmother. And the most important thing, her journals. No one knew I had them. After Eleanor passed, my father claimed they'd been lost in storage. He made a show of searching for them, saying they were important family records, meant for Tyler. Of course, as the eldest. But I had found them in a trunk in her attic the day after the funeral, and something inside me told me not to say a word. On Wednesday, I started packing. Not obviously, just 1 or 2 items at a time. A favorite hoodie, my notebooks, my earrings, a pair of worn sneakers that had carried me through 3 years of midnight shifts. I tucked everything into a single duffel bag. I slid it beneath my bed. If they noticed anything missing, no one said a word. Thursday, I wrote the letter. It wasn't a goodbye. It wasn't even emotional. It was a list, a clear, methodical ledger of what I had endured. Dear family, you probably won't understand this, but you should. I listed the times I had taken the blame for Tyler's mistakes, the birthdays I spent working double shifts so I could buy gifts while wearing secondhand clothes. The college tuition I paid was with borrowed books and late-night panic attacks. The family dinners where I disappeared behind someone else's story. The money I had contributed. Grocery runs, phone bills, utility payments were never acknowledged. never thanked. At the bottom of the letter, I wrote a single line: "You won't find me unless I want to be found." I folded it, unsigned, because they'd know. Friday. I gave my notice at both jobs. I told them I was transferring schools, moving for family reasons. Both managers looked genuinely sorry to see me go. One offered to write a reference letter. I almost cried. It was more acknowledgement than I'd received at home in months. Saturday came heavy. At dinner, Tyler talked about graduation and job interviews. Charles offered advice like he was prepping his protege. Laura asked if I needed anything for the new rental arrangement. I said no. She smiled like we were sharing a secret. I pushed food around my plate and listened to them laugh. And the only thing I felt was ready. Not angry, not scared, just done. I went to bed early, set my alarm for 3:15 a.m., and told myself, one more night, one more round of pretending, because tomorrow I will be gone. And for the first time in my life, I wouldn't need permission. The house was asleep when I left. The walls that had once heard lullabies and holiday laughter now stood cold and silent. I moved through them like a ghost, careful, practiced, invisible. It was 3:47 a.m. I wore jeans, sneakers, and a navy hoodie with the sleeves pulled over my hands. My duffel bag was already packed. Tucked inside were the only things that mattered: my laptop, the journals, a few clothes, my grandmother's jewelry box, and just enough cash to get me to Portland. I didn't bring photos. I didn't need reminders of what this place looked like. I had lived inside its silence long enough to memorize it. I avoided the third stair. It creaked, slipped past the grandfather clock in the hallway, paused at the kitchen table, where I had folded my letter the night before. It sat in the center of the table, unassuming, just a plain white envelope. But inside was everything I never had the space to say. I placed it next to my mother's coffee mug. She would find it in 2 hours, still warm from the dishwasher. I didn't linger. The front door clicked behind me with a softness that felt final, and I stepped out into the quiet dark of Silverfield's sleeping streets. No goodbyes, no last looks, just pavement, dew, and the sound of my own breath. The bus station was nearly empty. One tired-looking security guard, a young mother with 2 toddlers half asleep in a blanket, and me, a girl with a bag full of essentials and a heart beating fast enough to burst. I paid in cash. One way. Silverfield to Portland. 11 hours. No transfers. I didn't look back. The bus pulled away at 4:11 a.m. I watched my hometown disappear through a fogged window, streetlights fading one by one, strip malls giving way to open fields, fields melting into a dark horizon I didn't recognize. I should have been scared. I wasn't. What I felt, strangely, clearly, was peace. A kind of peace I had never known before. The kind that comes when you stop asking for permission, when you stop shrinking to fit someone else's version of you. The road unfolded in front of me, long and quiet. I dozed in and out of sleep, waking every so often to check my bag. Still there. Still safe. I clutched the journals like they were a lifeline. Maybe they were. At hour 6. Somewhere between rest stops and farmland. I turned my phone on for one reason only: to send a message. "This is Madeline Carter. I'm on my way. I'll explain when I get there." I sent it to the only person I knew who would understand. Dr. Meredith Holloway. My godmother. My grandmother Eleanor's closest friend. I hadn't spoken to her in years, not since I was a child, but I remembered the way my father used to talk about her. Coldly, dismissively. He said she was difficult, opinionated, not a team player in our family. That meant a woman he couldn't manipulate. And that made her exactly the right person to call. When I arrived at the Portland station, it was just past 3 p.m. And somehow, Meredith was already waiting. Like she knew. Like she'd been waiting all along. She stood near the benches, silver hair pulled into a bun, wire-rimmed glasses, a simple coat, and eyes sharp enough to see straight through me. "Madeline," she said, arms crossed. "You look like hell." "Hello." "Meredith," I whispered. "I'm sorry to show up like this." "No, you're not," she replied. "And you shouldn't be. Come on, let's get you home." And just like that, I followed her out of the station, out of my old life, into something I didn't have words for yet. But it felt like the beginning of something real. For the first time, I didn't feel invisible. I felt free. Meredith didn't ask many questions on the drive from the bus station, just offered me a travel mug of chamomile tea, adjusted the heat, and turned the radio down low. There was something comforting about the way she didn't push, like she understood that silence, for once, wasn't a threat, but a kind of kindness. Her house in Portland was nothing like the one I'd left behind. It was warm in the way real homes are warm, not staged or curated, but lived in. There were stacks of books on nearly every surface, a record player in the corner. The smell of lavender and roasted coffee lingered in the air. She showed me to a small bedroom upstairs with sun-yellow curtains and a soft lavender quilt. "Stay as long as you need to," she said. "But I have one rule." I looked up, cautious. "No hiding," Meredith said gently. "You left that house to start living. So that's what you're going to do." I slept for 12 hours straight that night, the kind of sleep that feels like drowning, heavy, still, dreamless. When I woke, the first thing I felt was hunger. The second was something I hadn't felt in years: safety. By day 3, Meredith took me to a local bookstore cafe called The Winding Shelf, a cozy, 2-story space tucked on the corner of a brick-lined street. It smelled like cinnamon and old paper, and the woman behind the counter wore a paint-splattered apron and a permanent smile. "This is June," Meredith said. "She's a friend, and she's looking for help." June didn't ask for a resume, just looked me in the eyes and said, "You love books." I nodded. "Then we'll get along just fine." By the end of that week, I had a job, part-time at the register, part-time shelving books, and helping customers find what they didn't know they needed. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest, quiet, and for the first time in years, I felt useful without feeling used. One evening, after the shop had closed and June was tallying the register, I sat at Meredith's kitchen table with the journals spread out in front of me. I hadn't dared open them while I lived under my father's roof. Some part of me knew these pages weren't meant to be shared with him. Now, I was ready. The leather was cracked from age, the pages filled with my grandmother Eleanor's careful handwriting. Most entries were short, observations, memories, sometimes names or numbers. But between the lines, something began to surface, something more than family stories. There were receipts, bank statements, copies of legal documents were tucked into sleeves between the pages, notes about meetings, handwritten checklists, and even property deeds. I didn't understand all of it, not yet, but I understood enough to know it didn't belong in a diary. Meredith walked in just as I was turning the page on what looked like a formal letter from a law firm. She stopped in her tracks. "May I?" she asked. I slid one of the journals toward her. She scanned the handwriting like someone reviewing a familiar map. Her mouth tightened. "Your grandmother was meticulous," she said. "She documented everything, especially after your grandfather passed." "She didn't trust my father," I said quietly. Meredith nodded slowly. "No, she didn't." We sat in silence for a moment. The only sound was the hum of the fridge and the whisper of wind against the kitchen window. She left this for a reason, didn't she? I asked. Meredith looked at me. Her voice was low. Certain. She did. And I think it's time you found out why. I didn't know then what those journals would lead to. I didn't know they held the blueprint of everything my father tried to take. But in that moment, at that table, in that house, with someone finally standing beside me, I felt the shift. I was no longer the girl hiding in the corners of her own story. I was starting to write a new one. It began with a signature. Slanted. Precise. Almost perfect. Almost. I had been flipping through one of the final journals when I found it, folded neatly between two pages describing a family holiday from years ago. A scanned copy of a legal document. I didn't recognize the terminology, but I recognized the name at the top. Madeline Rose Carter. My name. And just beneath it, my grandmother's. Eleanor Carter had established a trust fund. For me. Dated 3 years earlier. Just before she passed. I didn't know what to think at first. It felt like reading someone else's life. Someone luckier. Someone protected. But the document was real. Signed. Witnessed. Notarized. With one clear purpose: to ensure I had financial independence. College. A home. Freedom. I felt my throat tighten. Meredith. I called. She appeared in the doorway, tea in one hand, glasses in the other. I slid the document toward her. Is this what I think it is? She read it carefully, jaw tightening as she turned each page. Yes, she said finally. Your grandmother set this up to keep you safe. She knew what your father was capable of, and she made sure, legally, that this would be yours. Then why? I struggled to find the words. Why didn't I ever know it existed? Meredith didn't speak right away. She set down her tea, removed her glasses, and folded her hands. Because your father got power of attorney while you were hospitalized during your senior year. The room seemed to spin. You mean, when I had my breakdown? She nodded. You were in a vulnerable state, and he used that to claim legal control over your financial matters. Temporarily, at first, but long enough to make changes, to reroute funds. I sat back, stunned. I remembered that time. Barely. 2 weeks in a psychiatric facility. Panic attacks. Depression. I had been drowning in expectations and exhaustion. No one visited, except my mother. Once. Who brought me a new set of clothes and said, "Don't tell anyone about this." Okay. So he took it. I said quietly. He took what was meant for me. Meredith reached into another folder and pulled out a second document. This is where it gets worse, she said. I found this tucked between the journals, with the bank statements. It's a college enrollment form. I looked at it. My name was there. My supposed signature at the bottom. But it wasn't mine. The loops in the M were wrong. The angle of the R is too sharp. I had always written with a leftward tilt. This slanted right. It's forged. I whispered. We believe so. This form was used to authorize transferring education funds from your trust into Tyler's tuition account. My hands trembled. Tyler, my brother, who smiled through dinner while I worked double shifts, who received a brand new car while I was handed a rent bill. He knew. He had to know. I stared at the page, willing it to disappear, to be some mistake. But the truth was right there, printed in black ink. My future had been sold, signed away by people who claimed to love me, and I had thanked them. I had believed them when they said money was tight, when they said I was lucky to have a roof over my head. I didn't even want much, I said softly. Just enough to breathe. Just a chance. Meredith placed a hand over mine. You were never the problem. Madeline. They were. And now, it's time to decide what you want to do about it. I didn't respond. But in my chest, something began to solidify. The grief would come later. The betrayal had already settled. But beneath it all, a quiet fury began to rise. Not the kind that screams, the kind that builds, the kind that waits, the kind that fights smart. For the first time in my life, I wasn't asking for fairness. I was preparing to take it back. I didn't walk into Archer Whitman's office expecting justice. I walked in because I was done waiting for someone else to make things right. His office was tucked behind a modest building on the east side of Portland. Nothing flashy, just a brass plaque, a clean lobby, and a sense of quiet purpose. Archer looked to be in his early 40s, gray at the temples, but clear-eyed and calm, like someone who had seen things break and knew how to put them back together. Meredith introduced us. "She's ready," she said simply. He didn't ask why I was there. He just opened a folder and said, "Show me what you've got." I handed him the documents. The trust, the forged signature, the enrollment forms, copies of financial statements my grandmother had saved with painful precision. Archer reviewed them in silence, nodding slowly, page by page. When he finished, he closed the folder and looked up at me. "Cases like this are more common than you'd think," he said. "But your grandmother was smart. She left a trail. That helps." "What's the worst part?" I asked. He didn't hesitate. "Your family's going to fight back, especially your father. This will get ugly before it gets better." I looked him in the eye. "Let it get ugly. I'm not backing down." And just like that, we began. Archer filed the first motion within the week, a formal complaint for trust fraud and financial abuse, listing Charles Carter as the primary respondent. He attached affidavits, account statements, notarized evidence, all the pages my grandmother had hidden like lifeboats beneath her stories. The court moved faster than expected. By the end of the second week, we received notice a freeze order on all assets related to the Eleanor Carter Trust. Charles could no longer withdraw funds, shift accounts, or legally touch anything tied to my name. It was the first blow, and it landed hard. The response from home came quickly. First, a text from my mother. "Madeline, please call us. We're so worried. Whatever this is, we can fix it." Then from my father. "This is ridiculous. You're embarrassing yourself. Come home and we'll discuss this like adults." And finally, a single line from Tyler. "What the hell are you doing?" I didn't respond to any of them. I didn't need to. Because by then, the cracks had already begun to show. The second blow came 3 days later, in the form of a headline. "Local businessman's son arrested in DUI incident." There he was, Tyler, my brother, in a mugshot, disheveled, dazed, and no longer golden. He had driven into a street lamp at the edge of downtown Silverfield. Blood alcohol level twice the legal limit. No one was hurt, but the photos said enough. The perfect Carter son, publicly, undeniably, falling apart. Meredith showed me the article on her tablet. I read it in silence. "I didn't want this," I said softly. "Not like this." "You didn't cause this," she replied. "You stopped covering for it." And she was right. For years, I had been the glue, the fixer, the silence that held everything in place. But now, with me gone, no one was there to smooth the edges. The facade was cracking, and behind it was exactly what I had known all along: nothing stable, nothing real. That night, I sat on the porch of Meredith's house, holding a cup of tea I didn't drink, watching the sun disappear behind the hills. I thought about my grandmother, Eleanor, about the quiet war she must have fought behind closed doors, stashing away documents, recording evidence, knowing one day someone would need it. I thought about Tyler, whether he was angry or ashamed, whether he would finally see that silence doesn't mean loyalty, and enabling isn't love. And I thought about Charles, my father, who had spent a lifetime building control like a fortress. Only now, the walls were collapsing. Not because I had shouted, but because I had simply walked away and stopped holding them up. For the first time, it wasn't me being forced to change. 2 weeks after the court froze the trust, I received a message through an old social media account I hadn't checked in months. The sender's name was unfamiliar, but her opening line stopped me cold. I used to date Tyler. I think you need to hear something. Her name was Lillian Vega. And though her profile photo was kind, her message carried the urgency of someone who had held something in too long. I know this is strange, she wrote, but I heard your family's been looking for you. I thought you should know what Tyler told me, back when we were still together. It's about the money. Can we meet somewhere safe? Part of me hesitated. This could have been a trap, or a manipulation. But something about the tone, the restraint, the quiet weight of it, felt real. We agreed to meet at a small coffee shop outside Portland. Neutral ground, daylight, public, safe. When she walked in, I recognized her instantly. Not from photos, but from how Tyler had described her. Too intense. He'd once said, always asking questions. Now I understood why he'd found that threatening. She ordered a tea, sat across from me, and folded her hands around the cup like she was holding something fragile. I dated your brother for 6 months, she began. He was charming, at first, but there were things he didn't talk about, things I had to piece together. I nodded. That sounds familiar. She offered a sad smile. He mentioned you a lot, not always directly, but whenever he was drinking, the guilt came out sideways. What did he say? She reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. I know it sounds awful, but I started recording him sometimes, not to trap him, just to remember what was true. He had a habit of rewriting things the next day. She tapped the screen. There's something on here I think you need to hear. She pressed play, and there it was. Tyler's voice. Slurred, weary, unfiltered. Dad says family money should go to family success. And I'm the success story, right? That's what he calls me. But Madeline, she works so hard. She deserves more than I ever did. Sometimes I think about telling her. I do. But Dad would kill me. He says she'd waste it anyway. That she's not built for responsibility. But I know that's not true. I know she'd do something incredible with it. I didn't have the guts to stop him. The recording ended. I sat still, breath caught somewhere between grief and fury. The proof was right there, not just of the theft, but of the knowledge, the silence. The betrayal was wrapped in cowardice. He knew. He had always known. Lillian looked up from her tea. I thought you should have that. I saved it, in case I ever needed to protect myself. But you need it more. I blinked back, a sudden sting in my eyes. Why are you helping me? Because I know what it's like to be gaslit by people who say they love you, she said. And because I watched him rationalize what he was doing to you. I don't think he's evil, Madeline. But I do think he's weak. And your father knows exactly how to weaponize weakness. I stared down at the screen, the waveform frozen in time. Tyler's words still ring in my ears. He hadn't just let it happen. He had participated in the silence. And now, he could no longer deny it. This wasn't speculation. It wasn't memory. It was a voice, on tape, naming the truth out loud. Later that night, I sat on Meredith's porch with the audio playing on repeat in my headphones. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I just listened. Because hearing it, not imagining it, not suspecting it, changed something. I had spent years wondering if I was overreacting, if I had misunderstood, if the problem was me. But Tyler's voice said what no one in my family ever had the courage to say. That I was right. That I was worthy. that I had been robbed, and that the silence wasn't mine to carry anymore. The truth was out, and it wasn't going back in. The county detention center was colder than I expected, not just in temperature, but in feeling. The walls were washed out gray. The lights are too bright. The chairs are too hard. Everything is built to strip away identity. Even time felt suspended here, like shame had its own climate. I hadn't come to punish him. I hadn't come for closure. I came because I needed to look him in the eye and hear the truth without filters, without shadows. They brought Tyler out in a beige jumpsuit. His posture was smaller than I remembered. No smug smile, no polished charm. Just a man who had run out of places to hide. He sat across from me, separated by a wall of thick glass. The phone between us crackled when I lifted it. Neither of us spoke at first. He looked down, then up again, eyes rimmed with exhaustion, face unshaven. It was the first time I'd seen him without the armor of our father's approval. And for a moment, I didn't see my brother. I saw a boy who had been afraid to grow up outside their shadow. He spoke first. "I wasn't sure you'd come." I didn't answer. "I heard about the lawsuit," he continued. "And Lillian. I know she gave you the recording." "She did," I said. My voice was even. Not angry, not kind, just steady. He nodded slowly. "Good. You deserved to hear it." There was another long pause. Then he took a breath so deep it seemed to hurt. "I knew the money wasn't mine. I knew it was meant for you." "Then why?" I asked quietly. "Why didn't you stop him?" He looked down again. "Because I was afraid," he said. "Afraid of losing what little I had. Afraid of standing up to him. Afraid he'd cut me off the way he cut off everyone else who didn't fall in line." I told myself lies. Like maybe you didn't care. Like maybe you were better off without it. But I knew. He closed his eyes. God. I knew. The silence on my end grew heavier. He opened his eyes again. I wasn't the golden child, Mads. I was just the obedient one. I followed the rules, smiled when I was supposed to, played their game. But it wasn't me they loved. It was the version of me they could show off. He swallowed hard. "I wanted to go to art school. Did you know that?" he asked, almost like a whisper. I applied. Secretly. Got in. Full ride to a place in Chicago. But Dad said no. Said artists starved. Said it was a waste. So I studied finance and learned how to disappear into suits and dinners and internships I hated. I stared at him. I had spent so many years resenting his success, his comfort. And now here he was, admitting that his victories had been cages in disguise. "I'm not asking for your forgiveness," he said. "I don't deserve it. I just needed to tell you the truth. To say I'm sorry. For standing by while they used you. For taking what was yours. For not being brave enough to protect you when you needed it most." I felt the back of my throat tighten, but I didn't cry. "You let me drown," I said softly. "I know," he whispered. "And I'm sorry." The line hummed between us. And still, somehow, beneath the betrayal, I saw it clearly. He wasn't the villain. He was just another casualty of a family that taught us love was conditional, that silence was loyalty, that survival meant obedience. He had benefited, yes, but he had paid, too, in ways I was only beginning to understand. I didn't forgive him, not then, but I didn't hate him, either. As the guard came to escort him back, Tyler looked at me one last time. "I hope you win," he said. And for the first time since we were children, I believed he meant it. When I stepped out into the Portland air, it felt sharper somehow, more honest, because something had shifted, not between us, but within me. This story wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about recognition of who we were, of what had been stolen, and what we still had the power to reclaim. She arrived just after sunset. No call, no warning, just the sound of a cautious knock on Meredith's front door. 3 soft taps that somehow carried decades of hesitation. When I opened it, I didn't recognize her at first. Laura Carter, my mother, stood in a gray coat too large for her frame, her hair pinned back, her eyes more tired than I'd ever seen them. She held a small wooden box, pressed tightly to her chest like it might disappear if she let go. "I won't stay long," she said quietly. I have something for you." I didn't speak, just stepped aside and let her in. Meredith hovered in the hallway, watching silently. When my mother turned to acknowledge her, Meredith gave a small nod and disappeared into the kitchen. A quiet kindness. My mother sat at the dining table. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed the box between us. "I found these," she said, "in the crawl space behind our bedroom closet. Your father had hidden them in a canvas bag. I don't know how long they'd been there, but I recognized the handwriting." She pushed the box toward me. I lifted the lid. Inside, bundles of cream-colored envelopes tied in blue ribbon, each one addressed in the same familiar, looping cursive. "For Madeline." The air left my lungs. "They're from your grandmother," my mother said softly. "She wrote to you. Often, I think. She never trusted your father to deliver them. And she was right." I took the top letter and held it gently. The paper smelled faintly of lavender and thyme. I opened it slowly, as if touching something sacred. "My dearest Madeline," it began. "If you're reading this, then maybe, just maybe, you found your way out." Each letter was a thread back to the woman who had seen me, loved me, tried to protect me. She wrote of little things, my favorite childhood books, the way I used to hum while drawing, how fiercely I loved even as a child. But there were deeper messages too, warnings. "Trust your instincts. Darling, if something feels wrong, it is. No matter how many people tell you otherwise. Your father is not evil, but he is hungry for control, for legacy. You are not his legacy. You are your own." I looked up. My mother's eyes were wet, but she didn't cry. "I knew he kept things from you," she said. "But I didn't know it was this much. I thought, if I stayed silent, things would stay calm. I told myself that protecting peace was protecting you." I said nothing. The silence felt heavier than any argument. She swallowed. "But it wasn't peace, was it? It was fear. And I let it live in our house for too long." Another pause. "I filed for divorce last week," she said. "The moment the court froze the trust, he lost control over more than just money. He started unraveling. And I realized, I don't owe him my silence anymore. I never did." I stared at the woman who had once stood by while I was erased, dismissed, overlooked. And yet, here she was now. Not defending, not justifying, just present. "I'm sorry I wasn't the mother you needed," she whispered. "But I am trying, Madeline, and I'm not here to ask for a second chance. I just wanted you to have what was always yours." She stood slowly, gathered her coat. "I'll go now," she said. Unless you want me to stay." I looked at the letters, then at her. "I want to read these," I said softly. "But maybe, after that, we can talk." She nodded once, tight, grateful, and left the house without another word. That night, I sat on the couch with the letters piled beside me, reading them one by one. Through her words, Eleanor returned. She hadn't vanished. She had simply been buried, like so many truths in our family. But now, the silence was cracking. My father's control had broken. My brother had finally spoken. And my mother, after a lifetime of stillness, had chosen to move. The house of Carter was collapsing, but in its place, a different kind of family was beginning to rise. The house looked smaller than I remembered. Hawthorne House, once a monument to perfection, stood quiet against the overcast sky. The hedges were trimmed, the windows polished, but the weight behind the front door had changed. It no longer loomed. It cowered. I stepped out of the car, a folder tucked beneath my arm. Meredith waited in the driver's seat, eyes forward, giving me space. I didn't need her to come in. I wasn't afraid anymore. The brass knocker felt cold in my hand as I lifted it. 3 firm knocks. No hesitation. Laura answered the door. She didn't speak, just nodded once, subtle, solemn, and stepped aside to let me through. I walked the hallway I'd memorized as a child, past the gallery of curated family portraits, past the silent piano, into the study. Charles Carter stood by the fireplace. No tie, no jacket, just a white dress shirt, sleeves rolled up, collar slightly open. He looked older, tired in a way no sleep could fix. "You came," he said flatly. I placed the folder on the table between us. "I didn't come for closure," I said. "I came for truth and transfer of ownership." He smirked. "You think you've won something?" "No," I replied calmly. "I didn't win. I uncovered. You lost. On your own." He glanced at the folder but didn't open it. "You had everything, Madeline," he said. "A roof, an education, a name that mattered." I leaned forward. "No. What I had was silence, surveillance, a family that saw obedience as love and control as protection. What I had was stolen trust and a forged signature that paid for Tyler's future while mine was held hostage." His jaw tightened. "The court order's in there," I continued. "Full restitution. You'll sign the confession, acknowledging your abuse of fiduciary power, and you'll transfer this house into the hands of the Second Chances Foundation, effective immediately." His eyes narrowed. "You're giving it away. I'm giving it back," I said. "To the girls who were never chosen, to the women who were silenced, to every version of me that never made it out." For the first time in our lives, he had no prepared answer. He looked away, then back at me, and something cracked in his voice. "I saw the way she looked at you. You know, Eleanor." I said nothing. "She adored you. Not Tyler. You." I met his gaze. "Because I was never afraid of being real." He exhaled sharply, almost bitterly. "That's what I hated. You didn't care what people thought. You didn't play the game. You walked into a room and lit it up. And I—" He stopped himself. "I couldn't control it," he admitted, voice low. "That light. You walked around with a kind of power that didn't beg for permission. And I hated it." There it was. Not an apology, not remorse, but the truth. He didn't abuse me because I was weak. He did it because I was strong in ways he could never be. Because I refused to become what he needed to feel big. I pushed the pen toward him. "Sign it." For a moment, I thought he wouldn't. But then, he did. One stroke at a time, with a hand that trembled more than he wanted to admit. When he was done, I took the signed papers, placed them neatly in my folder, and stood. "This house will be filled with life again," I said. "But not your kind." He said nothing as I walked out. The air outside felt different, cleaner. Meredith was still in the car, engine running, music low. When I slid into the passenger seat, she glanced over. Did he sign? I nodded. All of it. We drove away from Hawthorne House. No longer my home, no longer my burden. Behind me, the foundation of that place, once built on image and silence, finally crumbled under the weight of truth. And ahead, there was room to build something honest, not from what I inherited, but from what I reclaimed. And from that reclamation, something new began. 2 weeks after we left Hawthorne House, the transfer was finalized. The title deed now bore the name of the Second Chances Foundation, a nonprofit I co-founded with Meredith and Archer. The mission was simple, but powerful, to help young people who had been financially manipulated, erased, or controlled by the people meant to protect them. We started from that same house. The same walls that once held secrets now held safety. Bedrooms once used for punishment were turned into recovery suites. The study where Charles had signed everything away became a legal aid center for survivors. And slowly, that place began to breathe again, not under the weight of legacy, but in the light of truth. Meredith took charge of counseling services. Archer managed the legal team. I led storytelling sessions every Wednesday. Girls barely older than I had been sat across from me, holding journals like lifelines. Some whispered, some cried, some hadn't spoken in weeks, but they listened when I did, because they saw something in me that I'd once lost. A future, not despite the past, but because of what we've survived through it. Laura now lived in a modest apartment by the river. She didn't bring much from the old house, just a kettle, a few books, and the stack of letters Eleanor had written. Sometimes she came by the center to read aloud to the younger girls. Her voice, soft, uncertain, grew stronger each time. Tyler was rebuilding, too, literally. He found purpose in woodworking, shaping raw pieces into something whole. He built new beds for the shelter, fixed broken doors without being asked. One evening, I found him sanding down an old crib, his eyes quiet, his hands steady. He didn't need to say anything. I knew. As for me, I wrote everything. My memoir, The Daughter Who Vanished, was released 1 year after Charles signed the papers. Not as revenge, not as closure, but as truth, unfiltered, unpolished, and mine. At the final stop of the book tour, the Winding Shelf, the same bookstore where I found my voice again, I read the closing passage to a room full of strangers who felt like kin. And then I looked up, met their eyes, and said what I once thought I never could. I don't vanish anymore. Because I don't. I used to believe disappearance was the price of peace. That quiet was the only way to survive love that came with conditions. But now I know. Silence isn't the absence of conflict. It's the absence of being heard. And light, real light, doesn't ask to be seen. It simply exists. So here I am, not erased, not broken, and never invisible again. I am the light they tried to extinguish, and I will never disappear again. They tried to make me disappear, but I didn't vanish. I rebuilt, quietly and completely. And now, I help others do the same. If this story meant something to you, tap like, leave a comment, and subscribe for more stories like mine. Because the quiet ones aren't gone. We're just getting started.